This is Oliver. In the middle of a family barbecue under the hot sun of a Sunday that should have been joyful, he was publicly humiliated by his own uncle for choosing to love a woman who was already a mother of two. The accusation was clear. He was a fool, a weakling, accepting to carry the burden that another man had abandoned. The contempt in his family's eyes was an open wound, a cruel judgment disguised as concern. A man of faith was being ridiculed for following what he believed to be God's direction for his life. Has your faith ever been put to the test before the ones you love most? Before I tell you how God responded to the humiliation Oliver suffered in that backyard, comment here where you are watching from and subscribe to the channel. Believe me, you won't want to miss what happens when God's silence is broken and the honor of a faithful servant is restored before men. Oliver's story is proof that our greatest blessing can come wrapped in what the world calls a problem. The conflict began subtly, almost silently. The air in his mother's suburban backyard was heavy, the smell of meat on the grill mixed with a palpable tension emanating from the sideways glances and poorly disguised whispers of his cousins. Oliver knew what they were thinking. He felt it. He was there to officially introduce Julia, his fiancée and her children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 5, as his new family. For him, it was a sacred moment, the fulfillment of a promise he had made to God in prayer. For them, it was a spectacle of foolishness, a monumental mistake that deserved to be judged. Oliver, at 35, was a man shaped by work and faith, a carpenter with thick, calloused hands, but with a serene spirit that few understood. He was not one for fiery speeches or grand public displays of religiosity. His faith lived in his silence, in the patience with which he listened to criticism, in the way his eyes conveyed a peace that seemed not to belong in that hostile environment. He had been the pillar of his family since his father passed away, but he always felt a bit apart, as if he were on a different frequency, hearing a voice no one else could hear. Julia, by his side, tried to smile, but her shoulders were hunched as if to protect herself from the atmosphere. She held her little daughter's hand tightly, while the boy, trying to look brave, never took his eyes off Oliver, his safe harbor in that storm of glances. The children, with the sensitivity that only the young possess, felt they were not welcome. They felt the rejection in the air, the way Oliver's relatives looked at them, not as children, but as a problem, an unwanted baggage that their future stepfather was stubbornly insisting on carrying. Oliver's mother circulated among the guests with a forced smile. He saw the anguish in her eyes. She loved him, he knew that, but she was a simple woman, easily influenced by the opinions of others, especially her older brother, Valdir. She was torn between love for her son and the shame she felt before the family's judgment. To her, what Oliver was doing was noble, but it was also madness. Why did he, a good, hard-working man, have to choose the hardest path? That's what her gaze seemed to ask every time it met his. Uncle Valdir was the voice of that judgment, a pragmatic man with a loud voice and unshakable certainties, who saw himself as the patriarch, the family's center of reason. For him, success was measured in material possessions, invisible achievements, and marriage was a business, a union of conveniences. What Oliver was doing challenged his entire worldview. Since Oliver arrived with Julia and the children, Valdir had been watching him from a distance, a glass of beer in hand and a growing contempt on his face, just waiting for the right moment to turn his thoughts into sharp words. Oliver felt the circle closing in. Every giggle from his cousins, every look of pity from his aunts, was like a small stone thrown against his conviction. He remembered the nights he prayed asking God for a family. He didn't ask for a perfect woman or a life without challenges. He asked for a purpose, asked for God to use him to be for someone the father he hadn't had for a long time. And then Julia and the children appeared. For Oliver, the answer could not have been clearer. He wasn't taking on another man's children. He was receiving the children God had entrusted to him. Oliver's serenity deeply irritated his family. They confused his calm with passivity, his faith with naivety. In their view, he should be seeking a woman without encumbrances, someone who would add to his material life, not, as they saw it, divide his already meager savings. They couldn't see the richness Oliver saw in Julia, the strength of a woman who raised her children alone with dignity. They didn't see the joy the children already brought to his life. They only saw the burden, the cost, the problem, the moment everyone was waiting for, and that Oliver feared finally arrived. Uncle Valdir, his voice already altered by drink and arrogance, walked toward him, stopping in front of him with a confrontational stance. The sound of the music seemed to fade, side conversations died down, and all eyes turned to the two of them. The stage for the humiliation was set. Oliver just held Julia's hand a little tighter, preparing his spirit not for a fight, but for the trial he knew was coming. He took a deep breath, seeking strength from God not to falter. "Have you lost your mind, Oliver?" Valdir's voice cut through the air, laden with contempt and alcohol. "Working like a dog to raise someone else's kids? This woman already comes with baggage, and you naive fool, are going to carry the burden that another man left behind." The words were like stones, thrown with the intent to hurt, to break. A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the backyard. All eyes were fixed on Oliver, waiting for his reaction. Uncle Valdir had a sneer on his face, pleased to have finally exposed what he considered his nephew's greatest stupidity in front of the whole family. The humiliation was public, brutal, and calculated. For a moment, Oliver felt the blood rush to his face. A primal fury, the instinct of any man to protect his own, screamed within him. He wanted to answer in kind, to expose his uncle's pettiness, the hypocrisy of everyone there. But another force, older and deeper, held him back. It was the faith he cultivated in the silence of his room, in the early morning hours of prayer. It was the voice of God whispering to him to be meek, not to return evil for evil. He felt the pain of injustice, the stab of family betrayal, but instead of exploding, he fought a silent battle within himself where wounded pride fought against the peace that surpasses all understanding. Beside him, Julia flinched as if she had been slapped. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she lowered her head, the weight of the word burden crushing her shoulders. She felt exactly as Uncle Valdir had described her, a problem, a weight on the life of the man she loved. Her son, little 8-year-old Davy, clenched his fists and looked at his great-uncle with impotent rage. He didn't understand all the words, but he perfectly understood the tone of contempt directed at his mother. Little 5-year-old Laura, sensing her mother's fear, hid her face in her skirt, beginning to cry softly, a sound that broke Oliver's heart. The family's silence was a double-edged sword. No one defended Oliver. The younger cousins exchanged complicit smiles, validating the uncle's cruelty. The older aunts looked away, embarrassed but compliant. Oliver's mother brought her hands to her mouth, her face contorted in a mixture of pain and helplessness. She didn't agree with the method, but the substance of the issue worried her, and her inaction was a tacit agreement. At that moment, Oliver realized that to them, he was not a man of faith making a decision guided by God. He was just the foolish relative who was making a mistake and deserved to be publicly corrected. Then, Oliver did something no one expected. He closed his eyes. Just for a second, 2, 3. To the others, it seemed like an act of weakness, of someone who has no response. But in that brief moment of darkness, he connected with the only source of strength he knew. It wasn't a prayer with words, but a surrender of the soul. "Lord, help me," was the silent cry of his heart. "Give me your wisdom, clothe me in your peace." He didn't ask for revenge, he didn't ask for justice. He only asked to honor God with his reaction, to be a reflection of the love he himself had received. When he opened his eyes, the anger had dissipated. What remained was a supernatural calm, an authority that did not come from him. His gaze met Uncle Valdir's, but there was no hatred there, only a deep, almost sad compassion. He saw in his uncle not a monster, but a man, blinded by his own worldview, limited by materialism. With a firm but gentle voice breaking the tense silence, he began to speak, and each word seemed to have been carefully chosen by a higher power. He was not going to defend himself, he was going to testify. "Uncle," he said, and the simplicity of the word disarmed the aggression in the atmosphere. "You look at Julia and these children and see a burden." He paused, letting his uncle's phrase echo, but now in a new light. "I look at them and see the answer to my prayers." The statement fell in the middle of the backyard like a seed on arid soil. It wasn't an argument, it was a revelation. "What you call baggage, Uncle, God presented to me as my greatest blessing, the inheritance I asked him for in secret." Completely ignoring his uncle, who now stared at him, dumbfounded and speechless, Oliver turned to Julia. With a gentleness that contrasted with the brutality of the moment, he wiped a tear from her face with his thumb and kissed her forehead. It was an act of coronation, a gesture that honored her in front of all who had humiliated her. Then he did something even more powerful. He knelt on the concrete floor of the backyard, getting down to the children's level. He descended to their level of fear to show that he was with them, that he was one of them. Looking into the frightened eyes of little Davy and little Laura, his voice became a protective whisper, a safe harbor. "You are my family," he said, with a conviction that healed wounds. "And no one ever again will disrespect you in front of me." It wasn't a threat to the others. It was a promise to them. It was the sound of a father rising to protect his children, not with shouts, but with the unshakable strength of a commitment sealed before God. That man on his knees was greater than anyone standing in that backyard. The atmosphere became even stranger. Oliver's response didn't bring relief, but a different kind of tension. The family didn't know how to react. They expected a fight, a loud family argument, but they received a demonstration of faith that left them bewildered. Uncle Valdir opened his mouth to mock again, to call it fanatical churchgoer talk, but the words wouldn't come out. There was something in Oliver's posture, in the authority of his calm, that left him momentarily speechless. He was about to hurl another insult, but fate, or rather God, had other plans for that exact moment. Uncle Valdir, caught off guard by the unexpected response, felt his face flush. Oliver's calm had disarmed him, and for a second he didn't know what to do. His intention was to crush his nephew with the world's logic, but Oliver had responded with a logic he couldn't touch. The anger returned with force, mixed with the humiliation of having lost control of the situation. He opened his mouth to let out a jeer, something to ridicule that pastor talk and bring him back to the ground he dominated, mockery and contempt. He was about to say that God doesn't pay bills, but a sharp, insistent sound cut through the air, silencing his insult before it was even born. It was a cell phone ringing. Simple, common, but in that charged atmosphere, it sounded like a fire alarm. Everyone turned toward the sound. The device was vibrating on the plastic table, forgotten next to a bowl of potato salad. It was Oliver's cell phone. He had left it there when he went to get a plate for the children, completely immersed in the mission of making his new family feel at home. The insistent ringing seemed to fill every inch of the silence, an interruption so abrupt and out of place it seemed scripted by a higher power. No one moved. They just stared at the flashing device. Seeing an opportunity to regain control, Uncle Valdir acted on impulse. With a quick, arrogant gesture, he grabbed Oliver's cell phone before anyone could react. He expected to see a friend's name, maybe even Julia's ex-husband's, which would give him more ammunition for his attack. "Let's see who's looking for you at this hour," he said in a mocking tone, his finger sliding across the screen to answer. And, in a final act of hubris, so that everyone could witness what he believed to be further proof of his nephew's foolishness, he pressed the speakerphone button. A deep, serene and authoritative voice resonated through the backyard, amplified by the small device. "Pastor Oliver, peace of the Lord." The word pastor dropped like a bomb in the middle of the family. Pastor Oliver, the quiet carpenter, the naive nephew. Glances were exchanged, filled with a confusion bordering on shock. Uncle Valdir froze, the cell phone in his hand, the sneer melting from his face. He looked at Oliver, who remained on his knees beside the children, with an expression of genuine surprise, not at the call itself, but at the moment it came. The peace of the Lord seemed to have arrived in a way no one there could have predicted. The voice on the phone continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that suburban backyard. "I'm just calling to confirm. The regional headquarters congregation has already been notified. Your installation as senior pastor will be on the first Sunday of next month." Every word was like a nail being hammered into Uncle Valdir's pride. Senior pastor, regional headquarters. The information was too specific, too official to be a joke. The humiliated carpenter, the man they saw as weak and ambitionless, was, in fact, a spiritual leader about to assume one of the most responsible positions in his faith community. Shock turned to disbelief. And then the voice delivered the final blow, the sentence that rewrote the entire narrative of that day. "We are all in prayer, and very happy with the news that you have found the blessed woman who will be your partner in ministry. Bring your new family. Everyone wants to meet them. Blessed woman, partner in ministry, new family, the very people Uncle Valdir had called. Burden and baggage were, in the eyes of Oliver's church, a blessing, an essential part of his divine calling. The invitation for everyone to meet them was the public validation Oliver never asked for, but which God delivered at the exact right time. A sepulchral silence fell over the barbecue. This time it wasn't a silence of tension, but of pure, absolute astonishment. Uncle Valdir was as pale as wax, his mouth agape, the cell phone still in his hand as if it were a strange object. The man, who minutes before felt he was the master of truth, the judge of the family, now seemed small, pathetic. His arrogance had been publicly disintegrated, not by an argument, but by a simple phone call. The justice he so disdained had manifested itself in a way his pragmatic mind could never comprehend or predict. He looked like an actor who had forgotten his lines in the middle of a play. The cousins who were whispering and laughing before now looked at each other with wide, ashamed eyes. Their malicious smiles had vanished, replaced by the expression of someone caught red-handed. They hung their heads, suddenly very interested in their own shoes. The humiliation they had wished upon Oliver had ricocheted and hit them squarely. The scale of their misjudgment was overwhelming. The relative they despised was, in fact, the most honored among them, and they had just mocked a man their own community revered as a pastor. Oliver's mother, who had been watching everything with her heart in her hands, finally broke down. But the tears that came were not of anguish or shame. They were sobs of relief, of pride, of a sudden and overwhelming understanding. The tears washed away all the doubt she had felt, all the influence of others' judgment. She looked at her son, still on his knees, protecting his new family, and saw him for the first time as he truly was, a strong man, guided by a faith she herself sometimes didn't understand, but which had just been validated in an unquestionable way. She cried for the son she always knew he was, but that the world had made her doubt. Oliver, for his part, felt a wave of peace wash over his soul. He hadn't planned this. The call from Bishop Adriel was expected, but not there, not like that. In that instant, he knew with a certainty that gave him goosebumps that this was the hand of God. It was the answer. Not an answer for his uncle or his family, but for his own soul, for the little doubt that had tried to creep into his heart. When the humiliation came, he felt no desire to stand up and say, "I told you so." He felt only immense, humble gratitude. God had fought for him, defending his honor in a way he could never have done on his own. Uncle Valdir slowly hung up the phone, the device seeming to weigh a ton in his hand. He placed the cell phone back on the table with a care that bordered on reverence, as if the object had been sanctified. The silence in the backyard was so thick you could hear the embers of the barbecue crackling. No one dared to speak. Their world had been turned upside down in less than 2 minutes. The power dynamics, the family hierarchies built over decades, had all dissolved with a single phone call. The humble carpenter had been revealed as a spiritual giant, and they were the fools who had tried to bring him down. Slowly, as if emerging from a trance, Oliver stood up. He dusted off his knees, a simple gesture that seemed to carry all the symbolic weight of that moment. He didn't look at his uncle or his cousins. His eyes went straight to Julia, who was staring at him with an expression he had never seen before. It was no longer just love or gratitude. It was admiration, a deep respect for a man whose strength was not in his muscles or his loud voice, but in an invisible, unshakable place. She now understood that she hadn't been accepted by a good man. She had been chosen by a man of God to be part of his calling. Oliver walked to his mother, who was still crying softly, and hugged her. A long, tight hug that said everything words didn't need to. It was a hug of forgiveness, of comfort, of restoration. He felt no anger toward her for her hesitation. He felt only love. He knew the family pressure was strong, and the relief he saw on her face was the only reward he needed. She clung to him, whispering, "My son, my pastor, forgive me," and he just stroked her hair, feeling the peace of God seal that moment of reconciliation. The change in the atmosphere was immediate, and almost comical in its swiftness. The same cousins who had ridiculed him now approached with sheepish smiles, trying to make small talk. "Hey, cousin. Pastor, great news, huh? We didn't know." The change in treatment was blatant. The respect they never gave him as a carpenter, as the simple man he was now poured out on him, not for who he was in essence, but for the title he now carried. Oliver treated them with the same serenity as always, responding politely, but with a subtle distance that made it clear something had changed forever. Uncle Valdir was the last to move. He stood still, his face pale, looking as if he had aged 10 years. He watched Oliver receive the forced congratulations from the others, saw the way he embraced Julia and the children, forming a fortress of love in the middle of that backyard. For the first time in his life, Valdir felt small, insignificant. His worldview, based on money and status, had proven to be poor and limited. He had built his life on certainties that had just crumbled. He, the patriarch, the man of reason, was the blindest of all. With heavy steps, as if carrying an invisible burden, Valdir walked to his nephew. He stopped in front of Oliver, and for the first time there was no arrogance in his gaze, only a deep, bitter shame. He opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. What can you say at a moment like that? Congratulations. Sorry. No word seemed sufficient to cover the magnitude of his offense. He just extended his hand, a gesture of truce, of surrender. Oliver, without hesitation, shook his uncle's hand, not with the joy of a victor, but with the compassion of one who understands human frailty. The handshake was firm, but brief. The wound was there, and only God could heal it with time. The party, if you could call it that, ended soon after. People left in silence, one by one, taking the weight of that afternoon with them. There was no longer a mood for celebration. The barbecue that began with judgment ended with a lesson in humility that no one there would forget. In the end, only Oliver, his mother, Julia, and the children remained in the now silent backyard. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with warm, soft colors, as if nature itself were blessing the end of that ordeal. While Oliver helped his mother clear things away, Julia sat on a bench, watching him. She saw the man she loved, but she also saw the pastor God had raised up. She saw the strength that came from his obedience, the honor that came from his humility. The children, now relaxed and safe, played nearby, their laughter filling the void left by the relatives. That backyard, which hours before had been a court of inquisition, had now been transformed into a sanctuary, the first home of this new family. The peace that reigned there was proof that the presence of God had swept away all evil. Later that night, as he put the children to bed, little Davy asked with a sleepy voice, "Oliver, are you a real pastor?" Oliver smiled, sat on the edge of the bed, and replied, "I am a man who tries to listen to God's voice, my son. And the most important thing he asked me to do was to take care of you and your mother." The boy smiled, a smile of pure trust and security, and fell asleep. In that moment, Oliver understood the depth of his blessing. The title of pastor was an honor, but the title of father and husband to this family was his true crown. That day, everyone learned an indelible lesson. They learned that human judgment is flawed and superficial, that the world's logic does not apply to the kingdom of God. Where they saw weakness, God was revealing strength. Where they saw a burden, God was delivering an inheritance. Oliver's silence in the face of offense was not passivity. It was the confidence of one who knows he has a God who fights for him. The humiliation he suffered was the stage God used to exalt him, not for his own glory, but for the glory of his name. The key story of that barbecue became a family legend. Told in hushed tones, with a mixture of shame and admiration, it served as a constant reminder of the day they witnessed divine justice in action. Uncle Valdir was never the same. He became a quieter, more humble man. He started attending the church Oliver pastored, sitting in the back pew, as one who silently seeks the forgiveness he never had the courage to ask for with words. He learned, the hard way, not to judge a man by the family he chooses, to embrace. Oliver and Julia married and built a life together. The children grew up calling him Dad, not out of obligation, but out of a love born from the security and protection he gave them that day. He became a beloved and respected pastor, known for his wisdom and compassion, especially toward those society considered burdens. His story became a living testimony in his church, an example that obedience to God's voice, even when it seems like madness to the world, always leads to honor and blessing. That Sunday afternoon, while the world judged a man for what he carried on his shoulders, God honored him for the family he decided to carry in his heart. Where men saw a fool taking on a burden, God was crowning a leader with his greatest inheritance, showing that the true strength of a man of faith is not in how he responds to insults, but in how he protects the blessings entrusted to him. God's silence is never absence. It is preparation. And when he decides to speak, the whole world falls silent to listen. Oliver's honor was not just restored, it was sealed with divine fire, so that all would know that to touch one of God's chosen is to invite the very hand of heaven into the conversation. And the bill, as they saw that day, always comes due. If you know someone who needs their faith strengthened, please share this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about how faith in God can move mountains. Thank you for listening.